I started making art when I was a kid. I had a neighbor when I lived in Alaska who gave me a paint set when I was like 10, I want to say. And she made paintings that reminded me now, I didn't really know it at the time, it was sort of Bob Ross kind of paintings. And I made a couple of paintings and used up the paint in the box and then put it away and became a teenager and forgot about it. And then when I later moved to Delaware, and I had a girlfriend who was getting ready to go away to college, and she was going to be an art major, and I hadn't really thought anything about it. I was working construction and playing in bar bands, and at that point she came home for the first weekend and had her homework with her, and she had to draw 10 objects in a sketchbook or something. I said, oh, I could do that. So I said, well, I'm going to go be an art major. So I went to college, and that was basically when I started, doing art in a serious way. I work from life. I set stuff up, and I paint directly from it, or usually draw directly from it. I usually actually paint away from the stuff that I'm painting. I mean, like in this, I actually painted this in the other room from where this was set up. And that's because I paint more from memory, and when you're right in front of whatever you're painting, it sort of dictates to you. And if it's away, if you want to make it a little more green, there's nothing in the still life or whatever saying, oh no, it's this color. In terms of literally how I paint, sometimes I put paint down first, sometimes it's very abstract, and then I draw into it or just paint into it. Other times I may start with a drawing. There's no real set way that I begin a painting or end one either, as far as that goes. Well, in terms of media, I mean, I use a lot of different things. I probably do more oil paintings these days than anything else, I mean, aside from drawings, which I make really a lot of drawings. But I generally use oil paint. I sometimes use acrylic, mostly if I need something to dry really quickly. But almost always the paintings end up being in oil, because you can paint the oil over top of the acrylic. Well, the exhibition at Stockton, Projected Memory, was really was work that I had been probably over 5 years. There was work from over 5 years. Not everything I made, but the oldest thing was about 5 years old, and some of it was literally wet when I brought it into the gallery, so it was like right off the easel. In terms of the title, people ask me, well, what is projected memory? I tend to think that all painting is about memory. I mean, even if you're painting right directly from something, as soon as you turn away from it to look at the canvas instead of what you're painting your memory of it. Sometimes the memory is a very short memory, other times it's very long. A lot of the work in the show, the original impetus for those were some works that I did when I was an undergraduate in painting, and I made works along these lines and tried to make oil paintings of them and wasn't very happy with them. So 30-odd years later, I came back to it. The themes, I think, oftentimes our themes are set pretty early, those things that we're interested in, and they don't really go away. We just nibble at them over a long period of time. I generally think about the work in very visual terms. I mean, I paint things usually that I'm interested in visually, in looking at, and then there's the change from, I'm interested in it visually in the real world, and then being interested in it visually in a painted world. The great thing about painting is you have really kind of complete control over it, and can put whatever you want in, leave whatever you want out. Well, in this particular show, there's a fair number of works in the show that have direct correlations with other painters' work. By and large, they're all early modernist painters, Cézanne, Matisse, Bonnard. But I'm really attracted to that whole sort of group of painters who, were either generally considered post-impressionists or even the very early modernist painters. I like them. I go back to them because I think there's this whole space that there's still a lot of work that can be done in that area. I mean, once we got into the 20th century, isms came and went. Every couple of years there was a new ism, but there was always some space there that I feel like you could work in. I mean, Matisse would do something that was very abstract and then turn around and make essentially a copy of it that was much more realistic. I'm usually going somewhere down the middle of that. It's kind of a cliche to talk about the middle of the road, and people usually think of that as being safe. And I always say, well, you ever stood in the middle of the road? That is not a safe place. That's the place where things can go great, or if you veer one way or the other, they could go horribly wrong. So I'm interested in that extreme of the middle. But there are avenues that you go down, looking. Sometimes you back up, sometimes you go forward. Painting, art in general, is nothing but a lot of possibilities. Freedom is almost like finding that area within which you can work. Sometimes I'll work on a painting over a year. Sometimes I'll work on a painting over 2 weeks or 2 months. But the actual time mixing paint, putting brush to canvas is actually usually relatively short. Most of the time I sit and stare at them. And I think that's actually my favorite part. And I always tell people, well, if I can't stand to look at for any length of time, how can I expect anybody else to? It only takes so long to get the whole thing wet, frankly. And after that, it's like mucking about in the soup. I sell paintings. I love selling paintings. I occasionally give work away to good homes because I want people to enjoy the work. I try to, I make work, I show work, try to disseminate the work as much as possible. It's certainly not, I don't do it just for myself. I mean, I'm sort of the first audience, but I like other people to see it. You have to find your own, idea of what success is. And, I think of myself as being a successful artist, although I don't make a fortune selling paintings.